Do you see then with language, it depends which medium you're in. If I'm in sounds, it's the sounds associated with speech, the language of speech. They give the connotation and start to communicate the feelings, the values, the mood, the thought structure that I'm in starts to be communicated to you by the sounds of the words that I speak. That's a spoken communication. But if it's a written communication, then it's not necessarily sounded in your mind at all. You see the letters, and it's the letters association, the way it's spelt, that is the association, giving the associations in your mind with the way other words and meanings are spelt in the written language. And so it triggers those associations. So if it's spelt with a Y, you start to think down, if I translate this into language, words like yes and you and your and yet and yacht, yeah. It doesn't associate with the So university being spelt with a U, letter U, has association with other words that are spelt with an A. Not words that are associated with a Y. It's spelt with a Y, and if you're in the language, the medium of writing and reading, then you tend to associate with words that are also spelt with Y. But if you're saying it aloud, you're giving the sound and it has therefore no. Sorry, let me get hold of this. I got it the wrong way around, haven't I? If I hear it as a year, as in university, then I associate the word that's being said with other words that sound the same way. Your, yet, yesterday, yellow. But if I'm seeing it because I'm in the medium of reading and writing, I'm seeing the letter U, and I associate the word university, therefore, then in that dimension, with other words that are spelt the same way, like up, other, under, us, because it's spelt with the symbol, and it's the symbol you're seeing, unless of course the symbol immediately says to you in which case you may associate it with other words as if you were speaking in the speaking medium. So in the King James it says it's written to be spoken aloud in churches. A congregation in large measure might not be able to read. We're illiterate. Only nobility had education and so on. But it could be read in the local tongue. This is particularly important in English history because being overtaken by the Normans from 1066 onwards. We have the elite speaking French in the court and the government, so to speak, the royalty. But the common man, the staff, the servants, the slaves, the bondman, the villain, in the medieval system, he speaks an Anglo-Saxon. He has a different language to the nobility that's now running the country. So it's is it lamb in the field, where the peasant deals with the creature, but when it gets onto the table it's mutton? It's pig in the field, in the sty, where the Anglo-Saxons dealing with it, but by the time it gets onto the table in the rich man's house, it's pork. It's whatever it is in their language, you see. A lot of words like that, apparently, the more you look, the more you find. So, interestingly, if you're reading the King James, don't just read it. Speak it aloud as you say it. And the sounds will give your hearers a different impact to them reading it. You go a step further. Supposing you pray, but without words. So you don't actually articulate what you're saying to God. You're just thinking it. Compare that now with speaking your prayers out loud. The classic picture, he's kneeling, praying, and he's praying to God, and you can hear what he says, because he's speaking it. He's talking to God. Oh, he's praying. And you can hear him murmuring away. He's saying it, and he's saying it in his language. That may be different to thinking it in your way of thinking. Now you may say to me, well, if I don't put a language to it, I'm feeling but not praying. Well, in a sense, that is truly what's driving even the prayer if you were saying it, isn't it? That when you say a thing, you're trying to articulate it in the language that you're speaking, or you're trying to articulate it in the language that you are writing. A written prayer. A written prayer read again is going to be different to a written prayer that's now spoken. And one that's just said without being written is going to be free of the written communication language, and purely in the spoken language. And there may be something about what's artificial when we say, oh, well, he reads his speech, I'm afraid. Oh, does he? That's not terribly satisfying, is it? No, it's a bit dead. Or he reads the prayer. Goodness gracious, does he mean it or doesn't he? If he means it, can't he do it spontaneously? And if he doesn't mean it, well, it's best not to pray, isn't it? We have all these sorts of notions, don't we? But possibly for a good reason, given our experience. I think there's a possibility in my mind that it's not that one language is better than another, the spoken is better than the written, but that they are different. And they've developed in different ways, and they're speaking to you in different ways. That's it, that Eastern guy, Manu, is it? I mean, if you know my language, you know my God. Well, if that's the case, then your language is absolutely very important indeed, crucial. To know God is life eternal in the Jesus conception of things. And, we don't want to use blasphemy, do we? I mean, goodness gracious, everybody knows that. From a religious point of view, blasphemy is, by definition, something that's unacceptable. Definitely want to avoid that. Because the wrong language, it's the wrong use of words, wrong connotation. You're destroying your understanding of God. Gosh, you will be in the depth of depravity. In medieval terms, I mean now, not modern Christian terms. You will be utterly separate from God, deprived of the presence of God. You're a blasphemer. You're wrecking your whole view of God by the words you use and the context in which you use them. You're destroying life eternal. Need to be burnt at the stake for that. That's the only good thing to do, apparently, if you've got a medieval view of things. Yeah, okay. How you speak is not trivial. According to our heritage, it's most important. Do you see how language becomes sacred? It embodies our God. If it's a common language, it embodies a common God. You have to say, is this the right view of God? Is this my God? Because I'm commanded to worship my God with all my heart, soul, mind and strength. Not your God, not any God, not the God even, but my God. It's the only one I can love, because it's who I am. Yeah, that's right, it's my values. And of course, if I do worship my values flat out, well, I quickly find out the consequence. And my values adjust accordingly to my experience. Don't like that, it burns, I'm not going near that again. That's bad and this is good. And you start to go the right way, don't you? That's the purpose of the universe of uncertainty, where you could practice worshipping your God. And through it, by experience, come to maturity. And as I've said before, you can avoid the ghastly experiences by heeding good advice. It's a bit tricky knowing what is good advice, of course, from your perspective, but seek and you will find. You'll find your way much quicker than simply learning by experience. Learning by experience is arduous, to say the least, and extremely hazardous. From our perspective, not from God's, of course, He's giving you the lesson that you need. Presumably. He's giving you the experience you need. You could just learn the lessons that you find available, and that will save you an awful lot of bad experience out there in the world. But I mean, there is some problem in knowing what's good advice and what isn't. You know, what's the wisdom of the ages and what is not. What's godly and what is not, in other words, is what I'm trying to say, isn't it? And you'll find out quite quickly by practicing what you value, which you will do with all your dedication and enthusiasm, because it's what you value. So you move through time godliness, coming closer and closer to worshipping the true God as you find it, as you find Him. And perhaps in heaven you still maintain an individuality of the view of your God, but you feel such a oneness with all those there. From this commonality of just how close your view of your God is to theirs by then, without being identical perhaps. Perhaps if your view is identical, then you simply merge with God. And you're no longer a separate entity, which might be the final consummation of fellowship with God, but don't dismiss the fellowship as of no value. We love fellowship. We love bringing up our children. And we love the company of our children when they're grown up. We don't just want our view of the world. We enjoy all the uniqueness of our kids. Thank you, Heavenly Father. How did I get there from the start? Where did I start? Hang on a minute. Well, what occurs to me going back to the beginning is it depends on the language you're in. And your God depends on the place you are in your development, from birth to complete adulthood. And perhaps we continually go through this cycle, not just in terms of what the religions, Eastern religions have called reincarnation, but in terms of what we might call from this perspective ultimately that we get nearer and nearer to a common view of God, which is God, the true God, and we merge into Him, but He continually generates more children to go through the same process, so that we're always experiencing and He is experiencing, and we are experiencing, being part of this lovely family. We just go through the process again. And I say we, it might be, well, it's hard to say, because if the final consummation is in fact, I'm not sure, but I'm using that word right, the way I'm using it anyway. If that final state is oneness with God and we blend with Him and there's no difference, then we are the person of God with Him, blended in Him. We're in there, in the mix, in Him, generating the next birth of family members. And we experience them growing up, maturing, being wonderful adults. After all, you're an adult much longer than you're a child, in this world anyway. You can imagine it's exaggerated on a much greater scale if we think of spiritual adulthood. Old age might be a sort of winding down of adulthood in the spiritual sense, where you blend back into God. Well, that's perfect. What could be better? And it's not that He's now lonely, because He's still generating a big family. I'm not saying I know, I'm just saying I'm flirting with such ideas. Thank you, Heavenly Father. And as regards this series of phonetic type associations and language and so on, words. I'm changing I'm not changing, but I'm missing out com2 because really it was added to com1 and really I should have separated it out, I think. I might manage to do that at some point, or I may simply jump from com1 to com3 and leave it at that, which is what I'm doing at the minute. So that's just a passing footnote. Thank you, Heavenly Father.